It's June 24th, 1996, and we're just flying about 300, 400 feet. We're just circling at the head of the Malaga Watch Harbour area, and Denny's Basin is on the left of our screen here. And as you can see, there's a cut or a canal, the remains of an old canal about 1,000 feet long, dug to about 4 feet deep to allow people from Marble Mountain to get to Orangeville instead of going all the way around. The shore is mostly partially stabilized cliff in the back shore, vegetated foreshore or poorly developed beach, sandy, and some cobble boulder in the near shore, but less so here than we've been seeing elsewhere along the outer coast. And we're actually just coming up on Nills Point now. The reddish material is derived from the till. It's reddish-brown till in the area. Underlying geology is Windsor Group, carboniferous rocks mainly in this area. And actually there's quite a bit of stratified drift all through this area, and that's probably why we're getting the sandier beach material. Coming up to the head of this small bay, again there's a bit of a road and wetland as opposed to beach, and as we make the turn around it's a little tight, but there's very little beach development. The road fringes right along. There's road fill along the side of the beach, side of the water, and then there's wetland at the head, and mostly low vegetated shores all along the outer part of this part of Malagawatch Harbour. Heading out of Malagawatch. This is actually all part of the Malagawatch Indian Reserve, I believe. Some of the housing down below, very sandy area, I guess, because of the stratified drift. Obviously has a big role to play, and you can see the dune grass on the point. Some pebble cobble in the near shore, but very little compared to the outer shores. Some buoys in the water, probably for anchorage as opposed to lobsters. And then a small barrier across that embayment. And then heading out past towards Campbell Point and the outer part of Malaga Watch Harbour and the Indian Reserve. We're picking up, again, very low-lying shore in places, the barriers, and then it switches into a partially eroded scarps. Small island here, I'm not sure the name of it. There's some wetland, mixed sediments, pebble, sand, cobble, and then probably about a 25-50 meter wide shoal all the way around it. Around the Campbell Point area, we have more communities of the Malagawatch Indian Reserve, people living on the reserve, probably into oyster farming and fishing. As you can see, the shores here are poorly inhabited. It's quite wet areas, wetland, bog in behind. Some dune grass where you get in the sandy areas, sand beach, and then there's a shallow area just offshore. It's mostly sand with the isolated cobbles and boulders. Coming around the point, we have a nice old farm, nicely grassed area coming into view in a minute. Traveling south on Big Harbour Island, you can see dune vegetation and sand deposits on this side of the headland, and then they decrease considerably as you come around the corner. But again, up by the wharf, you can see some sand deposits in the near shore, and then there's another small barrier that closes off a wetland. It's more pebble material along the shore, partially eroded scarps. Then we come into a very long barrier, fringing lagoon. There's an outlet just at the end here that's been closed off by sand and pebble material, and there's a bit of a groin sticking out with artificial material added. Well, looks like gold gypsum or whatever. And then another barrier, new construction. We're heading for McCrae Island. As we come up over McCrae Island, we're getting into the area of Johnson's Cove, and Gillis Pond is in behind. The beautiful barrier. There's some old beach ridges in behind. You can see the trees on them. It's mostly sand. There's some pebble in the beach, and then offshore is mostly all sand as well. And then we come around. There's another barrier in Johnson's Cove in front of a pond. More overwash here, more pebbly material, less sand, and then an erosional cliff. It's about 10 meters, and a lot of lobster traps just offshore here. See some artificial boulders added in places, but the back shore is very low-lying, some dune grass and some wetland vegetation. The shore itself is mostly pebble material, some sand. Then there's a wide shoal of more cobble boulder material, and you can see the lobster traps all lined up along here. Lobster season goes into July. Very beautiful spot. We'll be going into McCrae Cove. As we come around this island, heading towards Birch Point, there's a herring spawning ground all through this area. On this side of Big Harbour Island, there's several coves or embankments. Just in the foreground is an island, actually within one of them with a flanking spit. As you look at the shore, it's mostly fringing beach, pebble sand material, more shoal off Birch Point here, cobble and boulder. And then in the next embayment, the fringy beach changes into two barrier beaches, and this is supposed to be a herring spawning ground area, so we'll make a circle around these barriers. First barrier is well treed, there's no opening to the sea, whereas the second barrier is wider, lower, has large sand deposits both offshore and in the embayment, sort of stagnant waters, and you can see it's still connected to the sea. It's probably a sort of a sandy washover flat at one point, became vegetated as it got higher. As we circle along the back shore of these embayments, partly because it's a herring spawning area, we thought we'd have a more closer look at the area. You can see the difference in the water quality between the pond and the sea at this barrier and the sand deposit just offshore. Sort of a wetland, treed vegetation in the interior. And as you come past Birch Point into the next embayment, you can see another small barrier that's cut the pond off from the sea, and then you get a really good view of the near shore or shore face sand deposits that flanking spit off the island and the other island farther offshore. You see the sand deposits in this channel between the island and the mainland, and the two small cuspate forelands which have formed, and an extensive shoal that extends right across to the island. It would be difficult to get across and navigate. There's another house or building for scale in the trees. As we circle around, we'll go along the outer part of this shoreline again, and you get another
just good lighting of the nearshore deposits. It seems to be mostly sand with a mixture of cobble boulder here, and the headlands appear to have much more extensive shoals off up there. Another view that's like a spit that extends off the end of the island. Going by Birch Point again, you have another view of that shoal, and going into the next embayment again, you have another view of those same barriers.
We're just around past Birch Point, heading towards Grammy Point.
Rounding Grammy Point, the fringing beach gives way to an erosional cliff free face. Maybe bedrock at the base, but it looks to be mostly cobble boulder material, and there's a distinct line between the coarse material close inshore and the sand deposits farther offshore. This looks like an old spit that used to run along the shore or barrier. You see some beach ridges and another barrier here.
We're in the Malagawatch reserve area. Just along here there's a cemetery that, I believe we're just along this area where it was a cemetery was eroding. Here it's 12:39 and you're just picking up the cemetery now. There's eroding and some riprap's been added to it, and the barrier beach itself to the other side is mostly sandy. Some pebble in the storm ridge, a lot of wetland and old recurved ridges all along the back shore. There's a lot of vegetation and some pebble, but mostly a sand environment. So we've just gone up in towards, we're just at Knoll Point now, heading around Boom Island. This is all part of the Malagawatch Reserve. Very beautiful spot. As we head down the boom, the name, as you might imply, comes from logging days when you used to have a log boom coming through this area. Much of the back shore is very low-lying wetland, very poorly developed beach, treed, sort of a pebbly beach, very narrow. Some dune grass in the occasional spot where it's a bit sandier. The time is 12:41 and we're flying at around 400 at 80 knots. Fairly consistent shore along here. Partially stabilized, treed backshore. The foreshore is pebble and sand, and then there's a very narrow nearshore area exposed, and then it seems to be quite a bit deeper just offshore. Coming just at the entrance to the boom, again you've got a small foreland, cuspate foreland, formed of sand by the waves coming through the channel. Coming up in the Martin Point. And around the Boom Island area. Going along the Boom Island, the backside in the Denny Basin, Nicholas Denny actually in the 1600s used to have a summer home up in this area, and he used to call Labrador Lakes Labrador. I wonder if that's where the name came from, or actually whether it's the arm of the gold. But we're in the Denny Basin now, a very enclosed area. It's an oyster spat ground for the Eskasoni and Malagawatch Indian bands, and it's a very productive wildlife area. We're part of the Malagawatch Indian Reserve right now. It's 1243, and you can see a small barrier beach. It's sort of broken up. It's not well formed with vegetation along the back shore. There's several of these small or grassy areas with stagnant ponds in behind them, and then the shore itself is sort of a mixed sand, pebble, cobble. Coming into a bit of a headland here, a bit more relief, maybe 5-10 meters. And we're flying at about 350 feet. And the small spit at the end with the shoal extending off it, and Denny's Basin. And then as we come around, it's very much marsh and wetland vegetation. Going right across over to the outer part of Malagawatch Indian Reserve. Here you've got a good view here of the wetland area in behind the Malagawatch Indian Reserve, and there's probably a lot of bird life in the fall here and all year round probably. We'll just pull back and head back into Denny's Basin again, back out. And as you can see, it's primarily all a sort of a wetland vegetation, sandy. We're getting closer to that stratified drift again now, and very wide shoals off of this point of land. We're just going over them now. It's all sand. The beach is very poorly developed. It's mostly dune grass, and then treed area in the back shore seems to be more on the stratified drift. Heading across, coming up to that old canal again. Some of the housing on the reservation. Nice sand beach. They got a great location here. It's a fair bit of vegetation in the water just beneath us here. And then we're coming up to the old canal again. There's a cemetery back coming up. You see oyster spat cages in the background. Heading towards Allen's Point and the inner part of Denny's Basin. We're just leaving the stratified drift deposits. You can see them there, partially exposed cliffs, very small channels between the barrier into the inner lagoons. Look like fairly stagnant water though. There's a cemetery just coming into view now, and coming up towards Allen's Point. Again, you've got a fair bit of partially stabilized cliff. It's very sandy. Just a slight dip in and out. Going into Allen's Cove. And we'll be heading towards Mckenzie's Cove. At Mckenzie's Cove, there's a bit of an island here, Plaster Island, connected by a barrier beach. It's vegetated, it's mostly sand, dune vegetation. The time is 12:47. As we come around Plaster Island, we can see that barrier. It's quite sandy. Much less cobbled boulder just in that area, but then we're starting to pick it up again as we get closer. Some clear-cut tree logging in the back shore. There's a dirt road all along this part of the Denny's Basin. We're getting into the Horton group, Carboniferous rocks now, and so the sediment type is starting to change again. You've still got a fair bit of sand. You're starting to pick up more and more cobble and boulder material. We're into Mclean's Cove at 1248. Heading out is a low fringing beach, some boat ramps along this part, mixed sand pebble beach. We'll just come across over to Mclean's Island now. There's quite a bit of shoal water in between the mainland and those islands off Mclean's Cove. It's deeper just by the island though. The island itself has a bit more relief. There's partially stabilized cliff in the back shore, less than 5 meters height, and sand and pebble in the foreshore area. And then offshore you get a lot of submerged pebble cobble material. Not so much boulders, but there are some boulders. And coming around the outer part of Mclean's Island over to Black Island, so you've got the low fringing beach again. Fairly homogeneous, well-sorted material, small barrier at the one end. And it's 12:49 and we're flying at 400 feet at 80 knots. Coming across the Black Island, again there's a small spit at the, I guess the southeast end. And then on the other part, it's more of a heterogeneous pebble cobble material on the beach, and then offshore you're getting into a mixture again. There's quite an apron of shallow water around it. And then the channel between that and Stumpy Cove seems to be a little bit deeper. And we'll just circle just slightly and come over onto the main shore again. That plaster island, you can see why it's there. It's exposed to gypsum holding it in place. Now we're just coming up onto the main part of the shore again.
Just Stumpy Cove in the foreground, you can see the extensive shallow water sand deposits. At the end of this island, which shelters the cove, there's a vegetated shore and a narrow fringing sand beach, a bit of wetland in behind dune grass.
The island itself is very low-lying. We're heading up into Effie's Cove. Effie's Cove, very small cove. Again, poorly developed beaches, some wharf and housing, cottages. The time is 12:52, sorry, 15:52 GMT time. We're just in Effie's Cove. The geology around here has switched from a stratified drift to a Horton group, and the topography and the sediments reflect that. See poorly developed beaches, wetland in behind, very stagnant marsh sort of in behind the barriers. And it's shallow in the offshore, but not as much of an apron of cobble material as we've seen before. We're going to go We'll be going around Eagle Point right now and then up into the River Denny area. There's a fair bit of pollution in the area, and it's threatening the oyster fishery farther into Denny's Basin. As we come around the Eagle Point and into the floodplain area, where again we've gone by certainly a large stratified drift deposit, but we're still on most of the Carboniferous rocks. There you can see some gypsum coming into view along the shore. Bedrock shores along the edge of the river. We'll follow the sort of the north side of the River Denny's, looking across at more of the farmland area. You see the water down below us is very shallow. You can see the channels. It's very a lot of sort of vegetated mat in the water, brownish color along the channel margins. You just barely make it up probably in the video in the monitor, but dark color, well vegetated. Maybe this is an indication of the pollution, I'm not sure. In the back shore, it's sort of wetland. Follow the floodplain of the River Denny's up along here. The flow is following the main channel. You can see it almost looks like it's been dug out in this area just up here. Wetland vegetation all along the side, fairly well constrained channel, and then very shallow water on the north side of that channel. We come into the area around Eden and the floodplain around the Eden. In this floodplain of Eden, we find quite a large marsh area. We'll make a circle in this floodplain area. You can see there's clear cutting of the trees in this area, and we'll circle now and come around, and you should get a good view looking down the floodplain of the River Denny. Time is 12:56. We've just circled Eden, and we're heading out River Denny's. It's June 24th, 1996, and we're on tape 3, flying at about 550 feet and about 90 knots. Again, we're just getting back into that constrained channel area. It looks like it's been dredged almost. Either that or it's been an abandoned channel on the far side, on the north side. And then as you get further down again, you see a sort of a levee along the side of the channel, on the south side this time, and very little beach development. More of a low stabilized scarp. Very little farming on this north side. In fact, the road that leads along here is leading towards that large stratified drift deposit where there seems to be mining. There's a few houses along here. There's one new road going down to the river. Very shallow as we cross the bridge, coming up into view. Crossing the bridge at Mahoney's Point. And then we'll start to pick up that stratified deposit in the backshore and the mining that's going on.
Time is 12:58. We're just coming up to those stratified deposits mapped by Doug Grant of the GSC. They're used for sand and gravel mining by a concrete firm in Waikagama. The shore itself is quite sandy with sand erosional cliffs. There's sand deposits offshore, and although the beach isn't well developed, it's mostly vegetation, there is a good supply of sediment.
And then we're just going to go out around Lewis Island. It's a fairly low-lying area. It's June 24th, 1996, and it's 1,300 hours, and we're flying at about 400 feet. We're just at the head of the Denny Basin in the Bredor Lakes, and we're just going around Lewis Island. This area I was just talking about was fairly well contaminated. It used to be good oyster ground, and there's some herring fishing in the area as well, or spawning grounds. We're going around Lewis Island, which is quite low-lying, very poorly developed beaches, although there's some dune grass, some looks like old grass thrown up on top of the dune grass. And then we're going to go into Seal Cove. The time 13:01 and 400 feet and about 70 knots. We're just making a turn around. Very low-lying wetland. There's no obvious source of discolored water, although there's discolored vegetation in some of the wetlands here. Not sure where that would be coming from. As we go up Seal Cove, we're flying at about 400 feet. Very little beach development, a lot of vegetation in the water. It looks fairly stagnant in places down below us. There's some cobble lag in the near shore. The beach is very poorly developed, mostly vegetated shores. And the back shore is treed, brush, no real well scarps. We circle around the highway at Seal Cove. See, here's a fairly large farm. There's a good view looking down Seal Cove towards Mclean Point.